Hey, ESOS, Everett here. UC Santa Barbara is, like all the UCs, a research institution. Research is its main objective, and over $200 million are put into research and development at Santa Barbara annually. It's the place where robotic weaponry for Raytheon and Lockheed Martin are developed. It houses the Research Center for Topological Quantum Computing, and it's home to the Flying Pencil sculpture. Sculptor Peter Logan created the flying pencils as a moving sculpture, working with engineers to ensure that the wind would define its position and work perfectly under the laws of physics. We don't often consider abstract art and the drudgery of scientific progress to go hand in hand, but if you look a little bit closer, art and science aren't so different. At UC Santa Barbara, this sculpture is an icon seen by scientists frequently on their commutes to the research lab, making it a true blend of art and technology. But does it blend nature and technology? Bill Norrington's article on the flying pencil sculpture described it as a symbol of harmony between nature and technology. But where in the sculpture is there any nature? Sure, there's technology, like I just described, but what about the metallic pencils really says nature? What makes public art, for that matter, say nature at all? Not just visibly at first glance, but what kinds of public art stress environmental consciousness? First, you may be thinking, well, what defines public art? AmericaForTheArts.org refers to public art simply as art in public spaces. The very nature of public art seems to call out environmentalism, or an appreciation of nature. In the words of Green Pop NGO urban ecologist Georgina Avlonitis, public art articulates the richness and diversity of the relationships between people and their natural environment. The art often interprets the history of the place it's in, and can instill a sense of meaning, create memories, or bring together a community. Take Christopher Janney's Circling at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, for instance. A 20-year-old colored glass installation meant to both calm and intrigue airport visitors with its lights, sounds, and even a riddle. But while it stresses the airport goer's consciousness, it doesn't really stress environmental consciousness. No, for that we can try the Utah University Science Center and Bill Washabaugh and Jeff Lieberman's Life of Tree, a kinetic 3D printed sculpture depicting the reflection of a tree in water. This is undoubtedly an environmental piece, even down to the solar panels powering its lights. But if you look closer, there isn't much more to it than a plastic tree. Sure, it symbolizes the environment, but more so than speaking to environmental issues, this piece of art showcases the beauty of physical sciences like resonance and frequency response. In that sense, it's more like the flying pencils than anything else. No, for truly environmental art, we need to look to the Bowies. Joseph Bowies. The artist behind 7,000 Oaks, a 1982 public art showcase of 7,000 oak trees in the city of Kassel, Germany. Bowies started this project as a way to keep his country in tune with the environment during a time of rapid urbanization. But back then, this kind of environmental art project wasn't seen with the same reverence or totality that it is now. Citizens protested the trees as parking lot killers, mad that they would take up the space that new hospitals, banks, or other corporate infrastructure would take up. It's kind of crazy to think about today, but eventually the population of Kassel relented, and 5 years later the final tree was planted. While Bowies never lived to see this final tree planted, he started a new movement, invoking a sense of environmental consciousness. This environmental consciousness spread through the world, with modern artists following the lead of Bowies to create their own environmentally sustainable artwork. Nowadays, cities are quite literally forced to display this kind of public art, as part of the Percent for Art policy widespread around the world. In California, this policy varies by county, but on average requires at least 1% of the construction costs of a public facility be set aside for a piece of public art. This promotes community welfare, tourism, and a general appreciation for art. And oftentimes, environmentally aware artists can create a piece that demonstrates sustainability, making for a public who cares more about their impact on the environment. But what happens when they don't? We often consider the virtues of art and nature to go hand in hand, but sometimes public art can be made with the exact opposite idea in mind. Take Austin's Big Chiller Blues, for example, a 1,000-piece glass mosaic placed over the Austin Convention Center's parking garage. The name comes from the chiller contained in it, which connects to the Austin energy cooling system responsible for multiple buildings' air conditioning. There was no environmental angle in mind when constructing this piece, and the symbolism of it resting atop a carbon emission hotbed of gas-guzzling cars, alongside the connection it has to the most energy-intensive system in the entirety of Austin, demonstrates that. That isn't to say that this piece has no merit whatsoever, but it simply is hard to make a case for its positive environmental impact. And a similar story can be seen in the next piece. In 1981, civil servants and businessmen walking through the Foley Federal Plaza in Manhattan were greeted by the sight of a rather obstructive sculpture. A 120-foot-long and 12-foot piece of rust-covered steel was placed in the center of the plaza, obstructing workers from navigating to the courthouse and surrounding buildings completely intentionally. This piece was named the Tilted Arc, and its creator, Richard Serra, wanted to create interactable art in a public place that commuters would be forced to deal with. He had an environment in mind, just not a nature-based one. He wanted his audience to be made aware of themselves and their immediate surroundings at the expense of their patience and time. One of the core tenets of art in public places is to bolster the community of the place it's in. And in this case, the community was indeed bolstered. To tear the thing down, it was so hated on arrival that a jury decided to have it removed 5 years into its placement. And on the subject of environmental consciousness, the Tilted Arc did very little to remind its viewers of the trees and bushes that could have went there instead. Its bare-bones steel construction demonstrates a minimalism that completely forgoes any semblance of nature seen in the nearby parks and rivers. Speaking of nearby parks and rivers, 27 years later, another controversial art piece was installed, this time titled New York City Waterfalls. It featured 4 man-made waterfalls around the city, collecting water from the Hudson and East Rivers to just spew them back out. On the surface, the project was environmentally friendly, utilizing recycled water and energy-efficient LED lights affirmed by environmental consultants. However, the project's goal of an ecologically sustainable human-made waterfall wasn't exactly reached, as Brooklyn Heights trees and bushes nearby became coated in the river's salt water, redirected by the strong winds, and promptly dehydrated them beyond repair. The Public Art Fund responded to this by pouring gallons of fresh water onto the trees to flush the salt water out of the soil, which, as you can guess, wasn't exactly environmentally sustainable. That water could have gone to planting new trees instead of fixing the mistakes of a poorly planned art installation. And the hundreds of labor hours put into constructing the scaffolding meant to hold the waterfalls up was not quite the spitting image of sustainable architecture. But what even is sustainable architecture? This is an age-old question which has contested architectural students and art critics alike for generations. How can something with so many restrictions and regulations ever truly be considered art? Well, art in public places has a very similar level of regulation and restriction to architecture, and at the very least, both are encountering a growing trend in utilizing environmental consciousness in their construction. In the past few decades of increasing climate awareness, architecture has taken a turn towards sustainable development, either through the materials used, the energy-efficient maintenance, or the amount of greenery present on the site itself. In America, the U.S. Green Building Council stands at the forefront of this movement, with its LEED system ranking the sustainability of the buildings in the country. Since its inception in 1993, over 190,000 buildings have been labeled as LEED certified. For example, UC Santa Barbara houses quite a few LEED certified buildings, most notably Brent Hall. Taking a stroll through the top floor's Oceanside wing nets you not only a scenic view, but a noted lack of air conditioning, entirely due to its natural ventilation of the sea breeze. When you need to do your business, you notice that the urinals are waterless and the toilets are low flow. The building even gains 10% of its power from solar panels, and all of these extra bells and whistles cost the development only 2% more to the original cost. The building can be inspirational to the environmental students that gather inside it daily, but not every LEED certified building has the same level of thought as this one. Some places aren't in such a fortunate setting to be given naturally ventilated windows or have the sustainable backing and forward-thinking public image of one of the top environmental departments in the country. And sometimes they try to game the point system for immense tax breaks. Take the Palazzo Hotel in Las Vegas, for instance, which USA Today analysts found gained $27 million in tax breaks for these features, despite a smoking lounge, power-controlled curtains, and a large indoor waterfall, which don't reflect a desire for sustainability as much as they reflect the monetary benefits for having the label of green building on a plaque somewhere. In our history, these sustainable practices weren't done for monetary gain. They were made to improve our lives.
I would always phrase the question, when did architects and clients of architects lose the ability, and why, to put houses together that way? So the houses which take advantage of the distinct climatic and topographic conditions wherever you want to build something.
In fact, a report by John Schofield found that of the 953 NYC office buildings surveyed, the lowest ranking of the LEED certified buildings caused 20% more greenhouse gas emissions than non-LEED certified buildings. And with a quarter of all LEED buildings reaching only the basic level, you begin to wonder what the point of this fancy rating system even is. I mean, if Joe Schmo building down the street creates less of a problem for the environment than the fancy pants biodegradable skyscraper, do the labels attached have any meaning whatsoever? Well, yes, they do. At least for me. These systems may be flawed, but they represent the fact that major progress is being made to mitigate the damage caused by climate change. Sure, our architectural designs were sustainable in ancient Greece, but our overall CO2 emissions were completely negligible as well, and so we had no need to implement countermeasures to global warming within our society. Ever since the Industrial Revolution, however, that metric has changed, and with it, the necessity to connect with each other over a shared love for life has changed as well. In a society so focused on capital, oftentimes art in public places are considered wastes of money. The Tilted Arc, the NYC waterfalls, or the multitude of other structures require a vast amount of resources and money with a payoff that can't please everybody. But in the words of art critic Jerry Saltz, art is for anyone. It just isn't for everyone. And even for art that is quite literally meant to be seen by everyone walking by, it only takes one pedestrian to be moved for it to make a difference. And as always, thanks for watching.